Hello there, everybody. So what I would like to make in this video is my grandma's blueberry muffins. I love these muffins. They make a fantastic breakfast with some sausage or some bacon, or they even make a great dessert. So the first thing we're going to start with is the ingredients, because my grandma's blueberry muffin recipe is two things in one. It's actually the muffins and then a crunchy sugary topping called streusel. So we're going to start with the muffin ingredients. We're going to need 250 grams of flour. That's 2 cups in American measurements. We're going to need 10 milliliters of baking powder. That's 2 teaspoons. And that's powder, not soda, baking powder. We are also going to need 3.5 milliliters of salt, which is 3/4 of a teaspoon. We are going to need 112 grams of softened butter. That's a half a cup. We also need 200 grams of white sugar. That's 1 cup. We need 2 eggs that are at room temperature. We need 7.5 milliliters of vanilla extract. That's 1.5 teaspoons. And we need 125 milliliters of milk, which is 1/2 cup. I don't have the milk yet because I was waiting for it to warm up just a little bit because we don't want our milk to be too cold either. And then finally, we need some blueberries, but the blueberries are in the freezer because frozen blueberries is one of the most important things in this recipe, so we'll take those out later. We also need 150 grams of separate white sugar. That is going to be part of our streusel. All my streusel ingredients are here. We also need 94 grams of flour. That's 3/4 of a cup, and this is also 3/4 of a cup. We need 15 milliliters of water. That's 1 tablespoon. I haven't measured that out yet because the liquids are usually easier to do after. And you also need 7.5 milliliters of cinnamon. That's 1.5 teaspoons. And then finally, we need some softened butter, 66 grams or 1/4 of a cup. Last, but certainly not least, is the equipment that we will need. Everything you see on the table is all that you need to make these muffins. So we've got our spatula, we've got a couple of spoons that we're going to use, we have our big mixer from our last few recipes right over here, and then we have our paddle. So in just a second, we'll go ahead and get started with the recipe. Let's get started with the streusel, because the streusel is actually the easiest thing to make and we can just set it aside. So I've already got my tablespoon of water in the bottom of my bowl. I'm going to go ahead and add my butter. Now, if this doesn't pour out, I'm actually going to use my fingers for this one because I mix the streusel with my hands. So I'll just plop the softened butter out of here. It has to be soft or else the recipe won't work. So got most of my sticky butter in there, and that's okay because I'm going to mix it up with my hands anyway, so I can leave butter on my fingers. Then I'm going to pour in my flour and my sugar. Now, what we're trying to make is basically delicious sand. We're trying to make sand. So I'm going to use my fingers, and I'm going to rub the sugar and the flour into the butter. And it's going to be really sticky at first, and that's okay. We actually are going to get less sticky as we go along. So I just realized that right after I paused to do all the mixing and then come back and show you guys beautiful streusel, that I thought that this was just a little bit too thick. So I want to show you what happens and how you can fix that. I also forgot to add my cinnamon because I'm a silly person, so you can see it's brown now instead of very pale. I added my cinnamon, which is fine. We're not going to cook it, so you can put cinnamon in whenever. But see how this is all sticking into a single ball? We don't want that. We want it to be like more chunky and sandy. So I'm actually going to add a little bit more flour to it. Now, I don't want to add too much until I know what I'm doing, so I'm going to add that. I'm going to mix it, and I'm going to add a little bit more until I get the consistency, the crumbliness that I want. Alrighty, so I had to add another 50 or even 60 grams of flour, but this is what we want. See, some nice big but crumbly chunks that we will be able to sprinkle on top of our muffins. So we can set that aside, and then we can start to mix our muffin batter. Now it's time for the first two big steps of making our blueberry muffin batter. We're going to take our dry ingredients, that means our flour and our salt and our baking powder, and we're just going to stir those together. If you watched the chocolate chip cookie video, it's very similar. We put our dry ingredients into a bowl and we mix them up. So now that's going to be ready and we're going to set that aside. Then it's time to, if you remember again from the chocolate chip cookie video, to cream our sugar and our butter. All right, so what we're going to do, now that we can see the mixer, is we've made sure we put our paddle on, and we're going to put our sugar and our softened butter into the mixing bowl, and we're going to beat it on medium speed for about 2 minutes until the mixture is pale and just a little bit fluffy, just like with our chocolate chip cookies. So now that our butter and sugar are creamed, we are going to scrape down the paddle and the bowl. We're going to get all of the cream mixture back into the bowl, and you can see it's all up the sides. We're going to just push it down because now we're going to beat in the eggs. We've got to beat the eggs in one at a time, and we have to mix until the eggs are fully mixed into the butter and the sugar. In other words, no chunks of egg still floating around, okay? So I'm just going to find a place to set this real fast. Now, if we remember from chocolate chip cookie, I like to tap it once on the side of the bowl and crack it. Oh, that wasn't hard enough. Boop. And then crack it open. And in goes my first egg. I'll show you how to mix the first egg in, and then you guys can do the second one on your own. Put this in my little garbage pile in the back. And we want to start on a little bit low, but then speed it up pretty quick because the egg won't just go in there. It needs a little bit of strength. So, but we don't want to splash egg. We mix a little slow, and then we speed it up to about medium. And see, it just took maybe 30 or 45 seconds. Now both eggs have been added to our batter, and it's time to add our vanilla. And I'll spend on the video here just mixing it in with you. It'll just be on low, just until the vanilla is all the way mixed in. Now here comes the interesting part. In order to do the rest of the batter, we have to add our milk and our flour, but one after another. And you always start with your dry ingredients. This is very common to do in all kinds of muffins and cupcakes. We don't just dump stuff in because it can produce lumpy cupcakes or unmixed cupcakes or curdled cupcakes. And we don't want that. So I'm trying to scrape my paddle. There we go. And I always scrape the sides and bottom of my bowl. Very important. Because I can already see some things at the bottom that didn't get quite mixed up. That's no bueno. Okay, so I'm fully scraped and ready to begin adding. So like I said, we always start with flour, and we do it about 1/3 of the mixture each time. So I'll show you the first couple, and then you'll get to do it on your own. On low, always on low. So I might put 4 or 5 spoonfuls of flour in first. 1, 2, 3, 4, and that should be enough. And then we're going to let that mix in. And when I feel like it's wet, which is right about now, I'll pour about 1/3 of my milk in and let it mix up. A little bit more. And now we let it mix. And then we go to flour, and then a little more milk, and then the rest of the flour, and then the last of the milk. And now we should have delicious cupcake, or excuse me, muffin batter. Now, I said there were no blueberries here, but there are. They're in my freezer because one of the things I like to put in my muffins is frozen blueberries, and I'll tell you why. When you put a cold blueberry in, it's going to make your dough really, really thick and firm, which is a bit of a bummer. But the blueberries will always be whole in the muffin, so they like explode in your mouth when you eat them. The other thing that you might want to get before you take your blueberries out of the freezer is you need a muffin pan. Now, I like to use these little guys. This is a silicone muffin liner because I can just plop them down on a cookie sheet and I don't have to worry about anything. But you can also use a cupcake pan. You can use paper muffin liners, or you can spray it with no-stick baking spray. So let's go get our blueberries from the freezer and then we can add them to our muffin batter. So here what we have is we've got about 450 grams of frozen blueberries. I'm only going to use about half of this package, so I brought with me, you can only see the bowl, but I brought with me my scale. So I'm going to measure out about 225 grams or so and see how much that is. You know, we may not even need that much. I'm going to go with 200. So that's about 206 grams. It's a little bit less than half my package, but that is plenty to put into our blueberry muffins. So 205, 206 grams. I also need to make absolutely sure that my blueberries aren't stuck together. So I'm just beating them up a little bit to separate big frozen chunks like this, where I got 10 berries together. I don't want them together, so you can even run your fingers through them and get rid of the chunks, and you get nice purple fingers. Now, if 2 blueberries are stuck together, it's okay, but we just don't want like 10. So these look pretty good. So now, we have to scrape down the bowl, and we can even take off our paddle now to do that. We don't want any muffin to go to waste. Also important, not to eat the batter for the same reason we don't eat our chocolate chip cookie dough, because there's raw egg in here. And raw egg can make us sick. There we go. So we've got a nice clean paddle. We'll go ahead and put this in the sink, and then it's time to mix in our blueberries. I'm going to take this off the mixing stand so we can see. Look at all the blueberries. Now we fold them in. We want to be gentle and not smear as much as possible, because that is what makes the muffin batter purple instead of a pretty brown color. There will always be purple smears. It's a blueberry, but we can make them less. And you got to get all the way to the bottom, or you won't have any blueberries in some of your muffins. And we want lots of blueberries in every muffin. Okay, that's looking pretty good. So now we have blueberry muffin batter. We just have to put them in our muffin cups and get them ready to bake. We've come to the moment where it's time to fill our muffin cups. Now, when we fill a muffin cup, this is very important. We do not fill a muffin cup to the top. If we fill the muffin cup to the top, then the muffin can go and blow up and then make a not very pretty muffin. So the best way to do it is to fill it about 2/3 or 3/4 full. So what I like to do is I fill the first one and I figure out how much that's going to be, and then I try to put in my spoon that amount the rest of the time. So usually what I start with is a pretty big spoonful, like this. Pretty big spoonful. And then I plop that in to my very first muffin cup. It's hard to tell how full they are because the batter is really stiff now because it's got cold blueberries in it. But that's actually okay. It looks pretty full, but it's not, and it'll be fine. So I'm going to try to show it to you about how full that is. It looks like it's fuller than it is. So we want 1 big spoonful in each of our muffin things. So here we have all of these pretty full muffin tins, and here's what makes this my grandma's recipe. We're going to take our streusel. I'm going to have to shake it up a little bit because he's probably been sitting for a minute. And then we are going to sprinkle a generous amount of streusel on top of each muffin. It's okay if you get a little bit on the tray. Doesn't matter. Now that all of our muffins are topped in our lovely streusel, we're going to bake these at 190 degrees Celsius for about 30 minutes. The easiest way to tell if they are done is not only will they be a light golden brown, but if you were to poke a muffin with a toothpick and pull it out, it would come out clean with no batter stuck to it. Okay, so let's get to baking. All finished baking, so we can see all of our really pretty muffins sitting on their cooling rack, and I'll show you maybe one nice and up close. So here is our pretty muffin, nicely browned, fully baked, and now you can enjoy these for breakfast, for dessert, your choice. Enjoy!